down south, I should ask you. It's really wild here this morning.
It's wet in Wiltshire.
Yeah, it's pretty.
While we're waiting for everyone to join, we'll have a small chat in our green room.
I thought that was the most interesting thing I could think of at the moment. I'm looking in this studio and it's got what? It's got like these 8 huge windows and it's looking really gloomy in here, you know, so I think the storm is sort of coming back.
We're just going to wait till 5 past.
Yeah, same here.
Introduction. People are gathering.
Pretty grim. And
lots of panelists and lots of audience members commenting on their weather for everybody. It's grim in Brighton and it's pouring where
pouring. Where is it pouring? It's grim in Brighton. It's a good day for drawing. And are we automatically on mute? Yes, the audience should be automatically on mute.
I wonder whether they heard me talk about the weather.
Yes, they will. We're not on mute. So we're happily talking about the weather being very British for anyone who's joining us from overseas. It is 5 past, so I'm hoping that we have most people in the room. We're in webinar format, so we have only the speakers, our guests today, myself and Fiona Cassidy, who is helping us manage the event with audio, but we do and are able to take questions through the chat. So you should be on mute. Please check if you've got a microphone showing that you are. And we're really looking forward to a fantastic drawing discussion this afternoon. So welcome everybody, wherever you're joining from, whatever the weather, whether it's flooding in West Cork, whether it's gloomy in Brighton, or whether it's raining in Wiltshire, which it is here. Simón is joining us from Dorset and Sian is joining us from Newcastle. So we're spread across the country in the UK, and I know that we have a number of guests from elsewhere too this afternoon. Welcome to Drawing Projects UK. Drawing Projects UK is established to develop research projects in drawing and to engage with the public and all aspects of drawing around looking at drawing, talking about drawing, making drawing, and ensuring that we understand drawing as a primary means of communication and expression. We work across the UK, we also work on other projects, but we do have a base in Wiltshire, which is our front door that you can see on the first screen. So in the coming week. It does go on tour after that, so you will be able to see the show as it moves around the country. And the programme at Drawing Projects UK is supported by Arts Council England, and that's enabled us to run some of our drawing discussions online and to be able to share these much more widely than we usually do. So the format of the session is a discussion this afternoon with Simón Granell and Sian Bowen, who have in the Trinity Buoy Wharf Drawing Prize 2020 a drawing which is made collaboratively. So we're really looking forward to hearing about their working process, the ideas and genesis of the drawing that they have in the exhibition. And I know that you'll all be really looking forward to hearing them in conversation and also to looking at the drawing. So if you want to ask questions, please use the Q&A function. Fiona Cassidy will be monitoring the chat function as well. So if we'll move on to the next slide, and I will probably put my screen off. Maybe I'll keep it on. But we might want Simón and Sian just to wave, just to say who they are. And I'll just move on to the next slide. So brilliant. So we have for the first slide, and it really is great to welcome both of you. And you may, and I hope know, that Sian Bowen is Professor of Drawing at the Arts University of Bournemouth. She's a fantastic artist, and many of us will know her work individually and from her shows at the V&A in London, at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, but also most recently at the Edinburgh Botanic Gardens. Simón Granell also works at Arts University Bournemouth, so I'm anticipating that the collaboration may have developed through some thinking at Bournemouth. And Simón is also an artist and has shown with Patrick Hayder Contemporary Fine Art and also at the Lockup in Newcastle in Australia, New South Wales. So lots of practice-driven thinking around drawing, and which has resulted in the drawing that you can see on the right of the screen, Firefly Basket Tally 2019, which is graphite on recycled paper. And I wanted to ask Sian and Simón to start the conversation by perhaps talking a little bit about why they've chosen to work collaboratively and what they've found from that process. So over to you two.
Okay, well, yes, as Anita said, it's great that we've got this conversation this afternoon and to have the opportunity to really tease out some of the ideas that that Simona and I are beginning to understand more fully through these kind of conversations, not only through the actual making of the work, but through this kind of reflective process as well. So thank you, Anita, for the invitation. I just wanted to sort of, in a way, backtrack to, because we were discussing this recently, you know, how it was and what makes a kind of situation where you feel there's a trust in terms of collaboration. And so if I just talk very briefly, I was aware of Simon's work from before I was appointed at AUB. We were in a national touring exhibition called Drawology, which was curated by Deborah Harty. So I was familiar with his work. And then there've been a number of projects that we've worked on in terms of curation. We worked on a staff student exhibition. I am the space that I am. And we worked very closely on that exhibition, but we also traveled to Venice together to the 2018 Architecture Biennale. And we had the opportunity to install a very large number of artworks by colleagues, alumni and students in the British Pavilion, and to hold a one-day drawing workshop. And so it was these kind of conversations that we'd already had prior to working together that I began to realize that for me, I had like a real empathy with the way that Simón worked and his actual drawings, but also his approach to the way of thinking, looking at art, talking to people about their work, about to students and to other artists. So this was the kind of foundation. And then beyond that, I established a drawing research group at AUB. And we have about, at the moment, I think we have about 16 members. And so the drawing that's in the show, in a way, evolved from this initial feeling of empathy and trust that we had for one another and respect that we had for one another. And it led to an actual studio event where we decided as a group that we were going to begin to exchange work. And that was the starting point, wasn't it, Simón? They were sort of, it became more complex in the kind of theoretical and conceptual side of this studio event. But that was the kind of starting point. I thought I'd really flag up that this what preceded that was, for me, really important. It was a kind of respect and an empathy and a trust. And I think for any collaboration, I think this is what is absolutely essential.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about all the things that we'd done beforehand that had led up to it. And I think, you know, having seen your work firsthand and actually handled it in the context of curating some staff student exhibitions, I think what was really important in terms of this drawing was it was less about what the drawing was about, but more an opportunity to be sort of to sort of be with the drawing in a very kind of focused way. So not trying to collaborate in the sense of just doing what I would do normally, trying to kind of emulate or copy what you've done, but to really look at the sort of the mark making, not in terms of sort of narrative, but in terms of just really looking at the kind of character of what you've done, the kind of character of the marks, the kind of you know, the kind of register of those, looking at the sort of process, and looking at the marks as a kind of durational thing as well. So the response to what you'd done was very kind of literal in one way, and in a way sort of as a kind of strategy, actually quite common practice for me, which is to do something very simple, something that's not kind of goal orientated, that's more kind of about the process, and sort of gambling on the relationship between what you'd done and what I did subsequently, as creating some kind of transformation, so that I mean, interestingly, the drawing was finished. So you gave me this object, which, in your estimation, when you were doing it, was complete.
I think this is an important point, if I might sort of just come in on that, Simón, because at the center of this initial exchange that we had was the idea of the mechanical human, and in fact we curated another exhibition called Mechanical Human Matter. So this kind of the polarity between the mechanical and the hand touch, and this was in a way a means to bring these very disparate range of 15 researchers, practitioners, artists together. How can we find some kind of common ground? But what I wanted to say about the choice of drawings, because this is one of a number of drawings now that we've exchanged, Simón and I have exchanged, and we planned this to be an ongoing process. The drawings that we chose, it was very specific, and you know, I want to just flag this up, that for me, I made the first steps were made by myself. I made the first part of this drawing, and then this one was handed over to Simón, and he gave me a drawing. But what I want to say is this drawing was it was a drawing that I made from a working drawing. So there was no kind of open-endedness in a lot of the work. I mean, Anita is familiar with my work. You know, a lot of the work that I make has a kind of open-endedness, and I can imagine going into the studio and continuing to work on that piece of work. It's this question that we ask ourselves so many times: when is a drawing complete? When is a drawing finished? But these drawings that I made were a very large series of working drawings of this structure, this Firefly Basket, which was translated, you know, English translation from Hotorakagu. This what I felt was a very poetic title and a very beautiful object. This folding tea house made out of paper from the 18th century that had this name, Firefly Basket, because of the quality of the light inside this folding tea house. So I had become really interested in this as an object, but the drawings that I made from them, these particular drawings, and then they were remade for this particular exchange, were very, it was like closing things down. They were very much about working out the structure. And so I felt even that the repetition of the marks, it wasn't like anything would need to be added, because it was something absolutely complete and quite functional in a lot of ways for a very large installation of much bigger drawings that I was doing. So what I'm trying to say is, what surprised me and what I found so intriguing is that you can have a drawing that you feel is complete in itself. It has a complete, its function is maybe defined. It's complete as I said, as a drawing. There's nothing more to be added. and someone can come in and change the nature of it in either a very radical way or in a very subtle way. And this is what I was really intrigued by, what Simón had brought to this drawing for me, because it was like something that had no, in a way, it had no more energy in terms of my impetus, but he brought something very different but appropriate to it. So that's why I saw a bit long, but I thought it was important for people to understand the stages. There were stages for all the drawings that we exchanged, and this completeness was very important. Sorry, Simón, would you like to?
Well, I think we've talked about the importance of empathy as well, haven't we? That, and you know, I've said to you that I've tried something similar with someone else, and it just didn't work. And even though I really admire their practice, I think I realized I couldn't find a way in, or it seemed an effort to do that. Whereas what I've found quite effortless really is, you know, having done various things with you, is just finding it quite easy to sort of pick up on what I sense as a kind of an empathy, but the kind of the sort of energy that I sense in your work that is absolutely kind of in the mark making. It's sort of kind of contained within the process, and I find that the work you do is often incredibly delicate, but it still has this kind of vibration. And I think that's the kind of thing that quite intuitively I found is something that, you know, I've been able to kind of respond to. It's not been a labor in any sense. It's actually come quite easily.
There's a playfulness, isn't there, about your response to Sian's work? Also, you know, although it's about tally and it's cataloguing to some degree the marks, you could read it that way. There is something very playful about that discussion, dialogue between the two drawings around the nature of mark making and accretion of information. And I wondered if you could say something around that.
Yeah, I think the, you know, counting is really interesting. I think I think in the context of the drawing, it sort of, for me, it was a kind of anchor. You know, as is the case with some forms of meditation, you know, in a sense, the counting in itself doesn't mean anything. It's just a kind of an enabler for the mind. And again, that's quite a common sort of strategy for me, is to use a simple hook, you know, whether it's using text or paint or drawing, as a way of anchoring the mind in order for something else to happen. And the something else was the kind of noting, or the you know, the paying attention to what Sian had done. Yeah.
I think for me also what was interesting, because, you know, Simón has talked about this kind of meditative element of numbering, and this happens in quite a few. In one of the other drawings that I worked on with was a series of numbers. But I think there's two aspects to this. One, that maybe not so much on this scale, but certainly on the much larger scale drawings where I've repeatedly marked a surface in order to create a form. It's certainly been a very meditative experience for me. And, you know, and then there's this flip side of something that's so repetitive that it's physically, you know, it then becomes about endurance, you know, and the number of times I've had wrist and hand strain through repetitively drawing over the years. So there's a kind of side to this where there's the numbering which Simón had found meditative, but I'd also found this kind of this meditative mark making to create a form, but a form that, and a drawing that was also very functional. So there's kind of duality in my relationship with this drawing. I find it a very extremely poetic, like I said, you know, name and the object itself and the concept of this object, extremely poetic, but the way that I've actually created it is, you know, on this, you know, it's recycled paper. You know, rather than all the beautiful papers that I have in my studio. Anybody knows my practice, they know how much I love, you know, very beautiful handmade papers, but this is made on a very functional, recycled, cheapest paper. But I think the other thing that I found very interesting is that the way that these objects or structures are positioned is they can fold or unfold. And they're in my stage of the drawing, they're in a stage of kind of in between, but maybe more folding up rather than unfolding. And I think what I found so interesting in what Simón did is that he opened up the energy of the drawing. So it's moving, instead of moving from the perimeters of the rectangle towards the center, he's pushing outwards. So the energy of mine ultimately, I think, pushes in, and he pushed it outwards with the way that he tallied. And that, I thought that was so interesting. And if we think about Philip Rawson and that kind of reference to the difference between, you know, an Indian miniature, how everything is coming towards the, you know, that central point, or, you know, a Japanese ink painting where everything's moving out from the center, slipping off the edge. There was this very surprising dialogue that I recognized in what he'd and how he'd responded to the work. And then one final thing that, and I don't know if anyone's seen it, I've just got it out very recently. I made a very large series of works some years ago entitled Hive, which talks about that idea about a very quiet enclosed space, but has but you kind of recognize there's this energy or busyness within that space. And so when I saw these numbers, they also somehow for me anyway, signified something about these fireflies. They were kind of buzzing around the structure. So there's lots of layers to the way that in terms of my response to what Simón did with this drawing, which I kind of was surprised at, and it felt unbelievably close to my own work. That was the other thing. You know, you imagine if somebody's going to work on a drawing and not have a discussion beforehand, that it would transform it into something very other, but it didn't. It felt still very close to it, even though there was a surprise in all sorts of ways in terms of what he'd done.
Yeah, I think I've always been quite interested in this sort of gamble of doing something like this and not knowing quite. Still, what's happened is a complete surprise to me, really. But that sort of slightly perverse idea, you know, that you can kind of labour away at something that is essentially quite that has you know, that's kind of mechanistic or deterministic in its kind of approach. But actually, you know, despite that, and I have this conversation a lot with students, as they kind of sort of flip between seeing practice as being sort of, on the one hand, very intuitive, and on the other hand, quite known. And we even had these conversations when we were doing these drawings. I remember, Sian, where we were thinking about how to divide people up, and that became quite interesting in itself, how we all kind of went about doing things and how we would align ourselves with, you know, other practitioners or other members of staff.
I think we totally ignored any of the decisions we made. I seem to remember we kind of just gravitated towards, you know, maybe again a very intuitive response.
But I think it's because in a way it became inevitable. Maybe. And even though we started off with best intentions of being kind of, I don't know, kind of, dare I say, kind of democratic and open and listening to one another, there was a sort of inevitability, I think, that we would end up working together.
I feel that as well. And I think that's interesting, isn't it? And it comes back to that idea at the beginning, you know, any kind of collaboration, be it, you know, working, you know, on a specific art piece or curation, or, you know, working with a writer. It's like understanding first where the common ground might be in order to make something, create something surprising. That's my feeling. And the surprise is essential, and something new is essential, but I think there has to be that kind of, in a way, that kind of quiet understanding before.
Yeah, and that can come from a very known situation, you know, knowing your tools, knowing your intention, knowing your processes. I think, you know, far from being kind of reductive, actually the thing I love about it is it can do precisely the opposite. But you, of course, you don't know, and often I've done things where that transformation just never happens. So, you know, perhaps then the work is a failure, it's discarded. But you know, I think it's I find it quite liberating, actually, and I'm very kind of disposed towards the French sort of 1960s literary movement, the Oulipo, with Calvino and Georges Perec and people like that, and they sort of you know, where they use deliberate sort of textual constraints as a means of kind of triggering new associations. And I love that sense of, you know, using, you know, materials as tools in order to do that. I think it makes me kind of endlessly optimistic about something like drawing, that you know, just to, you know, just use a pencil you know, at one end of things is you know, has endless possibilities. And being involved with that in a simple way in terms of intent is hugely, this has the potential for huge discovery and possibilities.
I think also, yeah, I mean, just talking about simplicity, I think that two things. I think it was important not to overthink and overtalk things beforehand. I think that was really crucial. And I was actually in the studio when Simón was making this drawing, and was making a drawing myself. And what I thought, and we have some shots of it somewhere, Simón, I kind of glanced over at the drawing, and what I could see on to the side of it was just this huge pile of pencil shavings. And it was like, there was a kind of energy in that as well, because I didn't go over to look at the drawing, but I could see something like, there was this quiet energy of constantly sharpening the pencil that he was marking the drawing with. And I thought, yeah, something interesting is going on here. But, you know, it was only until he'd finished that I kind of, you know, crossed the room and had a look. And yeah, I was kind of really surprised at what had happened.
It's really interesting, because I had the moment of wondering in your exchange whether you had made them in the same space. So it's really,
yeah, but other ones no. Other ones no. A package arrives and you open it up, and yeah, there's a kind of excitement, but it's also, we were talking about this before, that, you know, you can go to an exhibition and you can look as closely, and you know, a lot of artists, including myself, you know, don't always glaze their works. But there is inevitably a distance that you have to keep from that work. But to actually receive it in a jiffy bag, and to be able to open it and put it on your own table, and to work on the back, the front, to cut it into the size of a postage stamp, or burn it on the cooker, or do whatever you like to it.
Yeah.
You know, there's that kind of freedom, because it's been given over, it's been passed on, and the permission has been you know, you've received that permission. It is like a permission. That's why I go back to the idea about trust, because it's permission to do whatever you want to do to that drawing.
It's also gifted, isn't it?
It's a gift, yes.
So I think there's something really interesting about the idea of correspondence and exchange, but also actually it's not just it is certainly permission, but that gifting of one to the other. And I guess my question would be, is it ever gifted back after that? Because you could see it as an imprint on somebody else's marks, or on, obviously it is on the drawing itself, but I did wonder whether that exchange is circular. Does it keep moving around?
It could be. We haven't done that yet, but it could be.
And so whether we're reworking these drawings, or they simply become references for other drawings, we haven't really discussed that, but I guess either is possible.
And I guess, sorry.
I think it's been important that I didn't, like Sian was saying, that actually we didn't discuss her drawing and what it meant, and the, how it came into being beforehand, because I think that would have changed the collaboration quite a lot. I think just having the thing with none of that backstory has actually been really helpful.
There's something very beautiful about the making sense of somebody else's thinking in this exchange, which doesn't, I mean, I use the word imprint, but it does of course do that in terms of marking and mark making. But actually it's much more an analysis. So it's one working drawing translated into a different methodology of working drawings, if you like. And I guess the challenge of a big group show like this is you see one specimen, one of them, and what we're hearing about the work and this drawing and the way it came into being is actually a framework of thinking and a framework of questioning authorship, all sorts of things in there. And actually, it just makes me hungry to want to see more of them in many ways, to understand and deepen that, my understanding of that framework and relationship. And I think you're absolutely right, Sian, is what it does is actually give it a mobility as a drawing. So it does feel like something that can fly. It feels like things flying and agitating around something as a structure. So it's an incredibly beautiful drawing, and yet it's incredibly provisional. It's provisional and meticulous. So it has really very lovely qualities in this exhibition. And I know people have been very drawn into understanding the marks and the mark making and the marking within it as they've spent time in the show. Is there more that you, Simón, you want to come in?
I was going to say it's quite different to some of the drawings that have followed.
Yeah.
And I've been just amazed at Sian's responses to drawings that I've sent her, which for me were resolved, were complete. Particularly given the process which it does not involve. Looking at some of the other drawings in the show, there's a kind of the familiar push and pull, where something is realized through an exchange with an image or a motif or a surface. And again, I don't do that. I kind of the works reach their own end in a way that's sort of known. But so again, likewise, I've been amazed that Sian has been able to kind of open that back up again in a way that's completely unexpected for me, but always with this sort of great sense of touch and sensitivity. Yes, and talking about permission, I mean, one of the drawings that Sian gave me, which I really just wanted to frame and put on my wall at home, I felt I had to pluck up the courage to tell her that I'd actually rubbed out all of her drawing.
Contact me a few times. I'm not sure. Just very, very brief messages, and then it was like, yeah, I've just decided to rub it.
Yeah, it happened incrementally. It wasn't a rash.
And are these drawings that you exchange with always met? I mean, the recycled paper is, as you said, Sian, very different from the papers that you usually work with, which...
They're all different. They're all different pieces and different. So I think this is also quite important, that it doesn't, we don't sit with anything that could remotely become formulaic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because all these different aspects that we've talked about a kind of surprise, about, I think, you know, with the range of different drawings that I've been working with, each one, I feel I've discovered something other about the possibility of what that drawing could be, or what another drawing might be. So, you know, like I talked about the way that the energy had been really changed in this drawing. This was like very revolutionary to look at it for me and see it, that somebody could do this to this drawing and completely change the energy in it.
I think if we had worked with, as you say, if a formula had evolved, you know, for example, with the paper, I think that would have been very reductive, and then we would have ended up just trying to solve problems.
Yeah, I think what's very exciting about it is that this isn't, in a way, creating a series of work. It's actually creating a structure for thinking through drawing.
Yes, and in that sense, it's kind of open. It's constantly open, and I think that's that's certainly something we would want to keep.
And it also opens up that, I mean, I touched on it very briefly, but that idea or sense of authorship, because it becomes, although of course one's very glad when I see the drawing and I feel a closeness to it. It's something that I refer back to some of those V&A drawings where they were, when I did the residency there, where my own drawings with a lot of mark making were cut with, you know, as laser cut drawings, and I really wondered about how close I would feel those were to me, whether I would feel that there was a kind of like a huge distancing through that mechanical process, and surprisingly I didn't. And in a way, I'm surprised there's this kind of dual relationship that I have with this drawing now, that I feel it's very close to me in terms of authorship, but surprising who came in and did this, you know. It's like, it's a very interesting conversation. I think that this is sort of, it's what's the word? You know, it's really opened up a lot of questions that we often ask ourselves as artists. It's opened it up in new ways. So I'm very glad to have had the opportunity to work with Simón in this way, definitely.
I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I think the other thing that it does is open up how we look at a drawing and how we read it. So the tally, you know, the numbering, looking at the marks very closely, is actually something that replicates looking at a drawing if you spend time with it, in terms of the attention that it calls for as we read the trace of the mark and as we read that accretion of marks. So I think it makes a complete drawing, and it makes a complete exchange, but it also shares something about visual language and visual thinking and the way that we read an image, because it asks us to read the image through somebody else's eyes. So that layering of authorship, I'm not saying it very elegantly, but I think the layering of authorship is actually really intriguing in terms of making us think about how we cover a surface, how do we unpack somebody's thinking, and how do we read the marks and how they arrive to create the image.
But also, I think, really acknowledging our own role in that process, which is, couldn't be other in a way. You know, it's actually, you know, we're so used to kind of reading art criticism and reflection about art as being somehow the case, you know, and that certain things are certain ways. But actually, we I think doing this with Sian has reminded me, actually, you know, I'm always bringing my own myself to everything. And in one sense, that sounds blindingly obvious, but so much so that we forget that. And actually, for me, that this process is a constant reminder of the openness and the fluidness of that, and my role in causing that to happen, and my understanding, or my not my second guessing, but just my speculation about what Sian has done, which is really rich and enjoyable process, I think.
I think just one last point that occurred to me was you receive, or you're gifted a drawing. How many tens of thousands of choices could you take? Why do we choose this? Why do we choose this particular path? And I was thinking that when two of the drawings that Simón sent for this exhibition, Mechanical Human Matter, that we exhibited just some of these pieces in, a very beautiful drawing, again with numbers, that I just very simply kind of wrapped a stone from I think from the Iron Age that I'd got in my studio, and it was a very simple brushing around the form, and it's like, why that choice? Again, I find it very intriguing. What prompts us to have the confidence to think that that's the thing, that's the next step in terms of the life of that drawing? And as it could be any number of decisions, maybe how you feel that particular day, or where you're actually making the drawing, or what you've read 5 minutes beforehand. So there's layers upon layers, I think, in terms of this. There's nothing prescriptive about it that starts to inform these choices that we've been making.
I think it's a really fascinating drawing, and I think it's a fascinating process. And I'm wondering whether we've got another 15 minutes. I wonder if we should open up and see if there are any questions from the floor. I'm just going to move it onto the Q&A slide so that I can see the controls as well. But I think, sorry, wrong one. I'm not sure. I'm probably going to need Fiona to help feed questions to us.
Okay. So we have one question in so far from Angela Hughes, saying fascinating discussion, and asking whether your decisions about trust were informed by Rauschenberg's account of his erased drawings. So he'd asked for de Kooning's drawings, and in contrast, de Kooning selected a drawing from Rauschenberg that would be difficult for him to rub out. And Rauschenberg also outlined later that it took him days to rub it out. Was that a kind of a bit of historical knowledge that was in your mind, or not, I guess?
I think I was, yeah, it's something I'm kind of familiar with, but I wouldn't want to kind of press the point there. I wouldn't say it was particularly present in the thinking of what happened. I'm not sure about what Sian thinks about that, but it wasn't really a thought. I was too involved, or the intention was to be as present as possible with the thing in hand, rather than start to think about historical things, or, as I said, even what Sian may have been thinking in terms of the structure that she drew. So really I was trying to get all of that out of the way.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I'm sure a lot of the audience and the panel saw that drawing when it was in London fairly recently.
Yeah.
And it's extraordinarily beautiful. You see it in a publication. You do get any sense of the kind of indentation in the paper. It wasn't in my mind, no. And I agree with but I do want to flag up how really I was very struck when I actually saw the drawing for the first time. But I think Simón is quite right. I think it is like a kind of sweeping out of a lot of other frameworks in order to have this kind of fluid and very intuitive response to these pieces that we've been receiving from each other. And as I say, maybe it'd be far more likely to have been influenced by what I'd read 5 minutes before or seen on a walk, you know, earlier in the day than contextualizing it in that way, in a historical sort of contextualization.
It also takes you back to your first point about the empathy, respect and trust. The correspondence between the two of you takes place in. So while there are those historical references, it's a very different kind of exchange.
I think so.
You know, it's a little bit like the idea of repetition. I mean, I'm sure someone else might disagree with me, but actually the last thing on your mind when you're involved in repetition is repetition itself. You know, it's a bit more like the idea of just sort of counting one actually each time. You're not trying to replicate anything. Think of someone like David Canern, you know, when he talks about his sort of line drawings, you know, his attention, his focus is just, you know, there at that point on the line, and being, you know, staying as close to the previous line as possible and so on. He's not thinking I've done this before or this needs to be like the thing before. You know, those are all, you know, in fact, he's trying to exclude those sorts of things.
Well, I think it brings it back to that idea about a meditative process, which certainly I found myself when working on these very large scale drawings in the studio, which have these very tiny marks, that it's about the moment of the mark that you're making on the piece of paper on that particular second in time, not about, like Simón saying, what came before or what's coming after. So it is very, in a way, it's a kind of strange thing, because it's very, it could feel very constrained. And like I was talking about the physical fatigue and hand and wrist strain, but it's also at the same time, it's very, it creates a real sense of freedom, because everything else kind of is falling away. You're in the moment of making, and I suppose that's the same with a lot of a range of different kinds of drawing. It's the moment. It's the moment when the touch on the surface, and that's I think a lot of artists will probably. Again, I'm talking about empathize. Will empathize with that relationship.
There is also the thing of marking time, isn't there? And that relationship for meditation, reflection, thinking, which perhaps in the current moment is something that's very meaningful for people. And I think it is a character actually through this selection of the exhibition, that it's certainly a characteristic within the work, and your work, Simón, which you're very focused on that role of meditation in the practice and as a practice. I don't know if you want to say a bit more about that.
It's sort of, there's a bit of a link there to one of the other questions that's come in on chat actually, which is Bruce Richmond's asking, how long do you contemplate the response? Hours, days, weeks? And I wonder if that's again quite intuitive, or whether
I would.
The others.
Yeah, I mean, for example, this drawing probably ended because of an external constraint, which was time was up. So, you know, that's not to belittle it. It's just, again, you know, the openness of the drawings that have been exchanged, I'm sure probably for Sian as well, the parameters for them have been as they are, rather than, again, establishing a set of parameters. So, you know, I think this drawing took me a couple of hours to do my bit, whereas one of the drawings that Sian sent me through the post took 2 or 3 days before I could, you know, even do anything to it, because it felt it's a very beautiful drawing, and I think I felt a bit on the outside of that. I didn't know how to deal with that. So you know, I would hope and expect that each drawing would or being with each drawing would kind of take its own course. And I think perhaps, you know, if Sian and I ever felt that actually it was becoming habitual or repetitive, then we probably want to stop.
Yeah.
I don't know what you think about that, Sian, but
Yeah, I agree, and yeah, I think that it's absolutely crucial that it depends on the drawing. The drawing and the response to the drawing is what determines these decisions. So yes, sometimes, you know, I think, like, again, Simon's drawings, 2 that sat in the studio for quite a long time with me, and then, but when I actually made it, when I actually carried out this response, however we want to describe it, it was quite a fluid process then. But you know, the looking and rest, it's almost like resting the drawing and coming back to it, and having the quite a luxury of having that time, rather than things being hurried or yeah. I think the other thing that that's not been mentioned is the important, I'm sorry, I'm going off the question a minute, but I just say this very briefly, the importance of the choice of works. Because if you choose a work that you don't value at all, then how does that, what is your relationship with that drawing then, if somebody has brought something new to it? If you give a drawing that you really value and somebody works on it, then again, it's a very different situation. So I think these are also other layers of questions. I mean, personally, I think for both of us, we've exchanged drawings that they're not the kind of throwaway ones that you have in the corner of your studio that you just keep a hold of until you've got too many, and then you kind of put them on the bonfire, or whatever you do with your drawings when you've got too many in your studio. But I think we have given ones that we ourselves value in some ways, but there's a whole different scale of why we value a drawing. You know, what is it saying to us at a particular point in time? So I just wanted to, sorry, to the question, going off track a bit, but I think that is another really important point that you know, to make in this whole discussion.
I think it's a really important point to make, and I'm just going to ask the last question from Brian Fay, which also links to that, which is about the finishing of the drawing, and is it finished, this particular one, and could it have gone through, or could it still go through further iterations? I mean, there's the question about when the actual drawing stops, or the debate or discussion through a particular, on a piece of paper, when it stops.
I mean, again, I think if I think about works by other artists that I've enjoyed, it's often been, and artists achieve this many different ways, it's often been because there's a space left. And somehow that's the space I'm then able to kind of start to navigate, or again, do my own thing, you know, enjoy it, think about it. And I think this drawing hopefully does that. It's sort of, you know, yes, I could have done a bit less or a bit more, but I think the process, the numbering is, as I said, it's ongoing. There could be more of it. So it's sort of, in that sense, again, it's kind of, it's been, you know, it's like the door's been left ajar with it. And you know, somebody could then also imagine, okay, what would this drawing look like if there were another few thousand numbers on there? But they can do that, so they can bring that to the drawing if they want to.
Or that it comes back to me. I mean, I think we haven't pushed that far enough, actually. I think that there's this, hello, Brian, by the way. I think that it would be interesting to see how far we can push this, and do we push it to a point where there's nothing more to discover? So I'm quite keen to go to the next stage where we receive back the drawings that the other person has. So I think that for me that would be part of our next. We think about the next stage of collaboration. I think this would be very valid, and I think we could probably completely kill the drawings, but maybe something is discovered in that final process.
Yeah, I guess for me, and we will wrap up soon, but I guess the question is there a conversation between the two of you about when it's complete? So it's complete through the action and the exchange that you set out for yourselves, is that you would make a drawing that was then handed to Simón. But is there a dialogue in between, or before it goes out into the world, which in a way is what it's done to come out to the selection process?
I don't think that's important. I think the only important part or valid part would be for it to go on to a next stage.
Right.
That's my feeling, Simón. I don't know what you feel about that.
I think the overarching thing that for me is that being involved in this process is a reminder of perhaps, I'm speaking for Sian here as well, but a kind of a reminder of this sort of a sense of kind of presentness, and being, and again, as I say, but being sort of, it's slightly sort of self-reflexive, just kind of noting the now and being with the work now. And however we talk about this collaboration and the structure of it, is that somehow it, for me, ultimately supports and reminds me of not being pulled away from what I'm doing now, and not being kind of, which is why the question about Robert Rauschenberg was important in a way, because for me that would be to get sort of drawn away into thinking about the past or art history or someone else's drawings or this or that, and whereas this, for me, it's kind of just, it's holding something kind of very lightly, and which is my attention, I guess, or Sian's attention with one another's work. And I think that's what sits on the top of this collaboration for me, is appreciating the value of that this can enable that to happen, I think.
That's terrific. And I think what a great point to leave that, which is actually this is absolutely complete in its process, its concept, and what we have out of that is a really terrific drawing, which is really engaging, and it engages us with its process through the drawing itself. And to hear you talk about it and the process and the framework you set has just really deepened that sense of drawing as dialogue, drawing in conversation, the way that we read drawings, and actually that beautiful thing of the correspondence between the two of you, which I think is really energizing and really exciting to hear about. So can I thank you enormously for joining us this afternoon, and to thank our audience for joining us too, and for the questions that we've had. I hope you've had a fantastically enjoyable afternoon. I've had a very enjoyable discussion, and it's been really terrific to hear from you. So thank you very, very much. And the only Q&A that came in was an enormous thank you from one of the audience. So I think it's been really, really terrific. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Simón. Thank you, Sian. Thanks for a fantastic drawing discussion.
Very welcome.
Thank you.
Great to be part of it. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.